Things are a bit upside down at the moment, and I'm doing this in the morning. I usually save these episodes for late at night when the city is quiet, but New York has been quiet for so long, and last night was so eerily quiet that it's funny, I didn't sleep. I kind of just was anxious. And when you're that sort of tense anywhere, doesn't matter, Beirut, New York, Minneapolis, wherever, Los Angeles, all the cities that we've been seeing in the U.S. Struggling at the moment. I think it's healthy to pause a bit, and whenever I pause, I end up going back to Beirut, at least in my mind. And I should just say a few things here. First, I apologize that the lighting is not great because I am doing this early in the morning, so the brightness of the room, I guess, does not lend itself well to the video. I'll also apologize, something that I don't know if I should apologize for this, but I dropped the camera, and I had to kind of put it back together, and I noticed there was some damage to the lens, and the video settings are kind of flimsy at the moment, so I have no clue if this will come out okay. I hope it does. I noticed that it was blurry several times when I started trying to record this, so if I'm maybe the less visible I am right now, the better. It's early in the morning, and I don't look particularly pleasant, or at least I don't think I look great. Maybe I'm shining at the moment. I don't know. I don't think I am. I'm tired, and I'm talking to a broken camera in a city under curfew last night, and let alone coronavirus, COVID-19, New York being the epicenter, and just having so much time alone, and maybe the only benefit to having experienced this level of physical distancing and staying indoors in isolation is productivity. And I've been working extra hard. I think I'm working harder on the podcast now than I was when I was in Beirut during the protests. So I'm, spending 15 hours a day between recording and editing and working on something special that will be released shortly in the next few days, maybe a week. I don't know. I'm making sure it comes out just right. This long introduction, I don't know if it's suitable or not for the issue that I want to get into. I think it somehow is, because I just was thinking what brought me here and what brought me to where I am today, at least, and I'll say this with a lot of caution, on a professional level, because I know that people sort of have 9-to-5 jobs, or maybe 8-to-8 jobs. I know people tend to think of work as going to an office most of the time. I know there's a lot of gig jobs, the gig economy, laptop cafe stuff, but even that I think is more professional, if that word is used right, professional, than what I do, because I still look at what they do, and I look in admiration, like, how this is it's hard. But maybe that says it all, that I love what I do. Keeps me stable, keeps me financially sound, and maybe that's all you need. Just follow your passion. But what brought me here? So I'm turning 39 in a few days. I'm heavily invested in this type of storytelling, and that's all I do. This is what I do, storytelling. But the moment that brought me here, where's that sort of that shift? I think it's exactly 15 years ago. 15 years ago to the day, June 2nd, 2005. This episode would include coffee because I am so tired. So excuse me while I caffeinate myself a bit in the middle of the climactic moment. But I have to stay awake. It's funny because 15 years ago I was doing the same thing, having a cup of coffee in Cécine at the Chase. I don't think it's there anymore. You know, or maybe it is. The last time I went through Cécine earlier this year, I don't know, actually, maybe it's probably gone. This is the Chase before Starbucks opened in Cécine, just next to the Bashir Jmeil, whatever, the plaque of Bashir Jmeil. I almost spilled the coffee on the laptop. That's what happens. Curfew, Corona. 8 a.m. episode, trying to put my mind, trying to think through a story. Camera breaks, laptop breaks, the podcast is gone. So where were you on? Well, we're getting there. At the Chase, I was sitting down, reading a book for pleasure. It's not for anything else but pleasure. But the book I turned to for pleasure is a very sad story. And it's a book by the late author Fuad Ajami, The Dream Palace of the Arabs. And it's the first chapter of the book. It's about Beirut. And it's a book about a poet who lived in Ras Beirut, a poet who dedicated his life to trying, I think, to explain his own personal story and the story of Ras Beirut and Beirut and Lebanon in general, and ended up killing himself at the onset of the Israeli invasion, 1982. The poet's name is Khalil Hawi, and the first I think it's maybe the first chapter is an introduction, but the second chapter, or at least the first sort of proper story in the book, is about that poet in Beirut, and it's just pure storytelling, but it's history and it's politics and it's society and its social affairs and its identity and its religion and it's everything. Ottoman history, Mandate history, pan-Syrian nationalism, Arab nationalism, Lebanese nationalism, all things nationalism, all things not. And Ras Beirut, in a sense, being a bubble that continues to shrink, it was a little bigger at the time of his, even let alone his suicide, but when he was an AUB professor. So, I have this book, and I'll just say it quickly here that I know Fuad Ajami was a, quote, controversial author. More controversial, I think, in his home country, Lebanon, and in the region than in the U.S., where he eventually spent most of his life writing about that part of the world. So, politics aside, especially his preferences for American sort of politics, let's say, or American foreign policy in certain stages of history, you can debate that all you want. I think it's a healthy debate, actually. That aside, the man could write a great story. And I don't know if it's still in print. I know you can buy it on ebooks. I got this at a time of no ebooks. Just you get the book. And I believe I got this from Antoine, sort of in... I think I actually bought it from Antoine Library. Went to the Chase. Sat down. Got the book, started reading the book, and maybe 5 or 6 pages into the story, I really don't remember. It's just the flash, and then the shake, and the panic, And the echo, that rumble that's familiar in Beirut, the screaming, people running. I think most of the people that were near the car bomb that took Samir Kassir's life that day, I think most of us quickly realized this was a bomb. This was it was a target. It wasn't just a random explosion. But this is pre-social media. This is pre-iPhone. This is before all of that stuff. So you literally would run. And I made my way home. And within maybe a few hours, I guess, on the news, they said that it was Samir Kassir who was killed. And I realized I forgot the book at the Chase, the cafe. So just literally tossed it and ran. Samir Kassir, I didn't know him personally, but I did run into him. He was a fixture in certain places, and I think I ran into him either a day or two before his assassination in Hamra. The timing is a bit off now, but I saw him in Hamra once. I'd see him in sort of different settings, but I never really approached him and introduced myself or even wanted to bother him. I admired him, and I think that type of admiration, you want to just sort of don't want to bother the person. I think in Beirut, people tend to bother a lot, and they sort of throw their ideas onto anyone with certain ideas, and I just sort of just wanted to admire him at a distance. But I did sort of I was lucky. I was close in that sense physically to him at certain moments, and I got to witness his charisma. And I think without realizing it, I fell in love with Beirut the moment he died. I say this in hindsight because 15 years later, all I think about is Beirut's past, Beirut's story. And I try to sort of piece the puzzle back together. Maybe sometimes I take the puzzle apart and try to examine it piece by piece. All stages of Lebanese history, all things that relate and still link to Beirut. I mean, this is what I do. I know this opinion is shared among many that knew Samir Kassir personally, and I guess it's the conclusion, which is he was a very decent man, an honest man, and not a politician, not a traditional Lebanese politician, modern Lebanese politician, the way we think of them. And he was an intellect, a historian, an author, a cafe sort of guy, and a French writer who could write in Arabic, and who would have his books translated to English at times, and maybe they don't always click in English, but that's just the curse of these kinds of translations. I think had I been great in French, let alone in Arabic, I probably would enjoy his writing that much more. But I only experienced his writing in English, and I love it. So I at the time I had worked at the UN. I was doing a Master's of International Affairs at George Washington University's Elliott School. So I was sort of leaving, going to Washington, D.C. Ended up doing a publications internship at the Middle East Institute. And it's funny because, 15 years ago, you should have seen what the Middle East Institute was like. And now I sort of did several episodes that sort of guests, and I went to the Middle East Institute to do some of these episodes, and sort of just got to see what it looks like now. It's a fundamentally different place. All that aside, though, it didn't click. I tried academia. I tried the think tank circuit. I tried the UN. I worked at the UN. I even, I got myself into the NGO world at some point. Didn't do it for me. I kept thinking back to, I guess, the shock of losing someone who was so dedicated to Beirut, and then witnessing it myself, watching my father let go of his re-established career at the IMF, putting it all away, tossing it aside, negotiating his way out at the same time. In June of 2005, hell-bent on going back to Beirut and trying once more to rebuild Lebanon in his limited capacity, whether his advisory role, whether it's his economics background, or whether it's his diplomatic career as an ambassador, or even just trying to find a way forward for Lebanon, where that the string of assassinations that was starting, Rafiq Hariri in February, and then Samir Kassir in June, George Hawi, and then of course the long list of assassinations afterwards. But I sensed my father was so, uninterested in staying in the U.S. then. He wanted to rush back to Beirut, and he did. So it's Samir Kassir, and then I see my father, a man I deeply respected and admired, not just because he's my father, but I really, I knew what he was doing, and I felt it. I was younger, but I understand it completely. And he took that opportunity and went back. I couldn't finish my master's degree at George Washington. I just didn't have it in me. I just couldn't imagine basing myself in D.C. while witnessing what was happening in Lebanon. And I didn't want to. I actually wanted to be in a place where I felt at home, and also my father, his love for Lebanon and his passion was infectious, and I wanted to be there. I went back, and I arrived 2 or 3 days before the summer war, July 2006. Yeah, that's a whole different chapter, but that forced me to make a decision. I literally said, that's it, I'm out of George Washington. I'm out of any sort of US-based job. I'm going to stay and work in Lebanon and find a way forward in Lebanon. And that summer I volunteered at Zico House with a group called Samidun, hygiene kit distribution. And I made some friends that summer just sort of by accident. Just sort of, every day you'd show up at Zico House, this sort of building, NGO, and, just like a center, merkaz for all these sort of groupings to show up and do their daily routine. I did hygiene kit distribution, and I sort of indirectly worked with Oxfam, and it made sense to me. And I transferred over to AUB, ended up getting my master's degree at AUB. Took some time. But it took some time for the reasons that I'm going to get into, which is even then at AUB, sort of feeling obligated to finish a master's degree. I kept going back to this sort of storytelling craft that I enjoyed. And It's funny, I've been holding this book the whole time. I ended up emailing this man, Fuad Ajabi, and telling him that I love the story. And we would end up writing emails back and forth for several years. But I wanted him to know that I was literally sort of taken by his chapter on Khalil Hawi, a man who kills himself in the middle of an Israeli invasion, watching the events unfold in front of me with Samir Kassir's assassination, and just, running away from it, but at the same time, wanting to head back to it and find a way forward and kind of just heal wounds, maybe. I don't know. But we corresponded for a few years. And I'm doing a master's degree on trying to finish a thesis, but I ended up literally just storytelling. I used to manage a hostel in Beirut, a student pension, at the end of Bliss Street, just next to Makhfar Hbesh, the Yusuf Hbesh, or the Ras Beirut police station. Small 2-story building, old rent, managed by the nephew of Kamal Salibi, a well-known Lebanese historian, a storyteller to his own. I mean, he was a fantastic writer and a very fantastic man to sit next to and just let him rant about all things that were happening. I got the chance to do that several times, thanks to his nephew. But I wanted to honor Samir Kassir, and I ended up crafting the Walk Beirut tour around his story. It starts with Daniel Bliss and that sort of the sort of shift in Ottoman legacy, if you will, sort of the rapid move that would usher in the 20th century and all things that we associate with modern Lebanese history. I would start at that point. Daniel Bliss opening the Syrian Protestant College on Bliss Street. And I would end it with the tragic end of Samir Kassir. And I would put all the storytelling sort of stories, if you will, in between, and I'd link them together in a way that was enjoyable. And it took time, but I found a way to do it. And it was clear to me, even at the beginning, after trying it many different ways and making sure that this is it, but I was sure at the end, I should end the tour with Samir Kassir. And when I say that, I mean next to his statue, next to An-Nahar newspaper, adjacent to Martyrs Square. Now it's time for water. 8 in the morning isn't bad for doing an episode, but you just need to mix it up with some coffee as well. It would be very tragic if I sort of fell asleep in the middle of the episode and keeps recording and then it's released. Maybe that would be the most viewed episode. He finally shuts up and fell asleep. I got lucky because Samir Kassir's book, Histoire de Beirut, or Tarikh Beirut, History of Beirut, was translated to English. And this bad boy, I thought this is the way you end the tour, by asking a guest, ideally a guest who's not too fluent in either this man's writings, or for that matter, has not, just sort of an innocence, if you will. You can kind of gauge who really wants to do this, and their linguistic skills are secondary. I would end the tour with asking somebody, and this is among 50 or 60 guests at a time, to read quotes from Samir Kassir's literature and his writings, his article pieces, and his books. And they're engraved on the ledge next to his statue. Hence, the Walk Beirut ticket. And this one is from 2011. I have many of these scattered in different places. I turned them into a bookmark. I'd always give them at the start of the tour without people knowing what this is. There's no reference to Samir Kassir here. It's just quotes in Arabic and in French. And I tell the guests, hold on to this. It'll make sense later. Hours later, we're right next to Samir Kassir, bringing his story to life. And I'm sharing this book. Okay? And I would only share the front flap. I actually had a copy. I tore the flap. I put it in my bag because this is a heavy book. And it's not easy. It's not easy to carry this around for hours on end, especially when you have other things to carry too for the tour. So I would force my assistant. Not really force here, but I would kindly request my assistant to carry this for me. And while taking photos, this would be in either the assistant's bag, or it'd be in like sort of a separate sort of. It wouldn't be visible. That was the purpose, that no one would see this. So it was hidden from view. But I'd carry a copy every tour. And ending the tour at Samir Kassir, if you got the quotes right, and if you could project the quote, and in particular one quote, which has been said on this podcast several times, if you've been on the tour, you've heard it before. عودوا إلى الشارع أيها الرفاق تعودوا إلا الوضوح. If you could do it, right? And if you could project, if you were confident in your ability to project Samir Kassir's words, his voice, echo it. I mean, really, just shout it at the top of your lungs. I would give a guest the book. Did this every tour. And got the quotes right, get the book. I did this, I think, I have several hundred of these books that I gave away. I have a closet in Lebanon. There may be 20 copies of this book because I used to buy them in bulk, and I'd buy them in advance, assuming that I had a string of tours to give, and I wanted to make sure I always had a copy of this book. And I always did. Antoine, at some point, stopped. They ran out of copies, and it took them several months to restock. I'd have to go to Virgin Megastore. Virgin would run out. I would wander over to Dar Bistro, and Dar Bistro closed. But at that time, they would do a sort of a special order now and then, and it would take some time though. So if I had a tour coming up, I'd be stuck. So on one occasion, I actually had to ask somebody who had won the book. I had to go visit them and sort of say, I have a problem. I know I gave you this book last week. Congratulations. And I know it's sort of, it may be signed, maybe, but I need it because I have a tour coming up. And, this was a very sweet sort of sweet woman. She said, yeah, it's fine, and I was like, no, I'll get you a copy as soon as my shipment arrives. And it arrived, and I ran back and I gave her the copy again. So I always made sure that you'd win the book and you'd keep the book. Never thought of racketeering where the same person would show up every tour and just sort of guess the quote and get the book and then show up on the next tour. I never, not that smart. But I was happy to give this book to a lucky guest who could project that quote, who could project Samir Kassir. It was my contribution to what Samir Kassir gave us. It's not just a book. It's not just sort of It's not a 600-page story that he left us with. It's the dedication, the determination to fight for Lebanon against all odds. And I had these conversations with my father, and I used to always make it a point that it's these voices. When you lose them, you lose a lot, and it's almost like the starting point is at a severe disadvantage. it's harder each time. And conversations that I thought would just be sort of, they would never sort of have that would never carry that weight later, because I never thought that my father's assassination would be the last one in that string of assassinations. Fuad Ajami, he emailed me, I think it was the day or 2 days after my father's assassination. It was maybe the day after, but I got it the next day. So I'm burying my father in Martyrs Square. And, I'm just going to say something here, that when I brought the tour back to life, I had to choose how to address Martyrs Square. And I wrote a eulogy, and I shared the eulogy on the tour when I brought it back to life 2.5 years ago. That eulogy is episode 100 on the podcast. It's called Al Burj. I made sure that I would address what happened to my father within the larger story of all that's happened in Martyrs Square, but I decided to keep the ending with Samir Kassir. So you would hear the eulogy, 30-minute roller coaster journey of all that is Lebanese history, and I would address what happened to my father, but in a sense I would skip over the finale. I wanted to make sure the tour, which at least the passion for the tour is from Samir Kassir, and I wanted to make sure that it ended with him, and it stayed that way. It continued to end with Samir Kassir. So Fuad Ajami emails me, and I'm literally on my way to the hospital to bury my father. There you have it, a hospital with an ambulance. I got a sentence, and I mean, Fuad Ajami would send these sort of very short emails, either a paragraph or maybe a few lines, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, but he just knew how to measure each word, and he just honored my father in one sentence. And it's that kind of it's like, I don't know, all the things that were said about my father, I still think about what he said, and he just said what I needed to hear. Half a year later, he's sick without people knowing. He's dying of cancer. And shortly before his passing, I get another email from him. And it's a short email that ends with, "Death has majesty. The idea that it heals with time strikes me as unpersuasive. I did not know that he was dying. I assumed he was referring to my father's assassination, and I never imagined that that was his way of saying goodbye." But that quote, that resonated with me so much, and I took it and I held on to it, and I still think about it. And any moment I have to pause and reflect, that's that kind of quote that resurfaces. He's right. 15 years later, after Samir Kassir's death, anyone that appreciated him, let alone loved him and lived with him, I was very lucky. I did several episodes with his wife, Giselle Khouri, with his friend Malik Mroui, and with his comrade, Ziad Majid. And other episodes that kind of, bring him back to life through friends, through admirers, whatever. I still think about it, and it never goes away. And storytelling. I don't know if I'm doing it correctly at 8 in the morning, or maybe now it's closer to 9. But I guess that there's a final point here, which is their stories. Anyone who deeply appreciated Lebanon's story and what Beirut gave them, and their attempt to give something back, I hope that we find a way to address what happened to them, because those wounds need to heal somehow. And this unjust way of losing people, it's not just untimely, it's unjust, without it being tackled head on, and finding a way to heal. I think I think there's a chapter in Lebanon's story that just doesn't end right, and I want to live long enough to have that chapter end the right way, because it means a lot to me in a personal way, and it means, I think, the most to anyone who lost someone this way, through this type of violence, and their criminals get away with it in Lebanon. It's wrong, and it needs to be addressed. Thank you for handling me this morning, and I promise you a lighter sort of conversation the next episode. So, thank you.